Oh. We will go ahead and get started. We are excited to have Amanda Rasmussen here to talk about how she got into ultra running and her most recent 200-mile race adventure. Thank you for being here, Amanda.
All right. Well, thank you guys for all being here. So basically, 4 years ago, I kind of started a weight loss journey. I was about 260 pounds and decided I was kind of fed up. And in about 7.5 months or so, I lost around 120 pounds. Through that, I started signing up for different races. I wanted to do like Spartan races and American Ninja Warrior. That was like what I was set on. So I started signing up for Spartans and a Warrior Dash. I did those initially, and then I signed up for my first 10K in honor of my aunt who has had breast cancer. So I did the Avera 10K back in 2018. So in 2017 is when I started the weight loss, and in a year I went from 1 mile to a 10K. After that, I just decided, hey, I love to run. So I just kind of decided to keep seeing how far I could go. Then I did the Sioux Falls Half Marathon in September of 2018. And after that, I said, I think I could Boston qualify, so I'm going to try and do a marathon. So 6 weeks later, I ran the Mankato Marathon. And that's when ultra running kind of was brought to more in my attention. The 325 pacer, which was my goal time, had said that he ran a bunch of 100-milers, and he was like, it is the coolest sport that you can ever get into. It's such a different environment, and I was really intrigued by that. And he told me, if you Boston qualify today, you can run 100 miles. So I ended up Boston qualifying, and then I said, okay, I am signing up for my 50K. So 6 weeks later, I ran a 50K. And I placed third at that and just did that in 5 hours. So I was like, well, I'll start signing up for longer distances. So in 2019, I ran my first 50-miler, which was Berryman, which I just did a week ago, which I'll talk a little bit more about that adventure as well. So I ended up doing really well at Berryman, and I signed up for Tunnel Hill 100 in November. I was kind of intimidated by the distance, so I thought I'll do the easiest 100-miler out there, which happened to be Tunnel Hill. Very flat course, rails to trails course, and I ran that in 21:40, and I had lovely Jess over there helping me out with that. She's kind of my go-to person for every ultra that I'm in. And then after doing so well, I started signing up for more races, and then obviously COVID happened. So 2020 was not the greatest year for ultra running or running in general or life in general. So I just felt like I wanted to do something bigger, something more. So I started signing up for different 200-mile races. I put my name in for Moab. I put my name in for Tahoe. I didn't get into either one of those, but I did get off the wait list for Potawatomi 200, which is why we're here today to kind of talk about. And that experience was hands down the most incredible experience I've ever had. So Potawatomi is a 10-mile loop in a small town in Illinois, and it has about roughly 13 to 1,500 of gain per loop, and it's all very short, steep ascents. Unfortunately for me and the other racers, it had rained quite a bit leading up to the race and then during the race. So it made going up those steep ascents and descents quite difficult. So we were sliding around a lot. At one point, one of my pacers had her poles on the side, and she just basically skied down a hill. So that was fun to see, and it's such a different mindset in those long distances. realizing you really need to take it easy and scale back and not push yourself too hard. So I think the biggest component for me was realizing when do I rest, when do I eat, how much should I drink, and those are just things I had to eventually learn. Through the ultras that I've done, my experience is still quite limited, but I feel like I know my body quite well now as far as I was eating at every aid station, filling up my water bottles, drinking Tailwind, which is kind of my go-to fuel source. Um, this particular course has several water crossings as well. So on top of the muddy course, you're going through creeks that are up to your knees at some point. So my feet were constantly wet. So blisters became a huge problem for me. Um, Again, we'll bring it back to Jess. I know you can't see her on the stream here, but she was amazing. She took care of my feet. We used a lot of squirrel's nut butters, kind of my go-to for the lube. And then we were also using KT tape over those blisters as well to just kind of prevent more rubbing from happening. And I think that was definitely beneficial. I still ended up losing 4 toenails, and they're still kind of popping off as I go. Uh, but that's the beauty of being an ultra runner. You just get used to not having toenails anymore. So, yeah, it just got increasingly more difficult with the downpour that just kept happening. So, I think knowing what you're going into in a loop course like that, it's kind of intimidating. And when I was on what ended up being my final loop there, I just was like, I don't think I can do this another loop. I ended up calling my folks and talked to my folks and my son just to kind of get my head back in the game, and was like, I'm really struggling right now, guys. I just needed to hear your voice, and that helped me push through that what would be my final loop. But I had a really great team of pacers that were just very supportive, and they kind of were like, okay, you need to get going, keep moving. And I think that was definitely a blessing in disguise. A lot of the people that were there were strangers to me before this whole event happened. And they became some of the closest people that I know now, just because you go through that journey with somebody, and they see you in the highs, the lows, and believe me, there's a lot of highs and lows in 150 miles. It's not all sunny skies and rainbows, obviously. In this event, it was cloudy skies and rain. So I was very lucky to have the crew that I did and the support that I did. I eventually decided to throw in the towel at 151 miles after some detours had happened on the course in my third loop in the dark. Sorry, Jess. I know I keep looking at you because she knows so much of that story. But basically, I made a wrong turn after a bridge, and there was like a flag that was in the middle of the trail, and it ended up being like a 2.5-mile detour. So that was 30 miles in. So it was right in the start and very discouraging. But I kind of was like, well, if I go to the finish, they're going to DNF me, so I better go back out there and figure out where we went wrong. So that added about an extra hour onto my time. But the biggest thing was just the support that I had was so uplifting that it didn't really bother me as much as I thought it might. So when I got to the point where I was finished, it was just, I had blisters on my feet that were screaming at me to stop. I had about silver dollar size blisters between my big toe and second toe on each foot that were just very painful with every movement. So after that, after we kind of threw in the towel, I mean, I was at peace with my decision. But now I'm just like, I have to go back and do it. I have to go back and finish this 200-mile distance. And so even though it's a really tough course and always tough conditions, it's definitely something that I want to do more of. So I decided, I had already signed up for Berryman 50, my first 50 that I told you guys about. When I had won, they gave me a free race entry to that. So a week ago, well, a little over a week ago now, I went back there. And about 6 miles in, I had a really bad fall, which I kind of tore up my arm, knee, and elbow. I kept going. 13 miles in, I had another fall that just tore everything up more. And then after the 16-mile mark, I fell again, and this is when I noticed I had a protrusion on my elbow. This is another loop course, so it's a marathon loop, so it ends up being about 53 miles. But when I saw the protrusion, I was like, okay, well, that doesn't look good. This is not okay. This doesn't feel great. I thought about dropping a lot. I knew I had a couple other aid stations to go through, and I just decided, nope, I'm just going to power through it and at least get a marathon finisher's medal. So that's what I ended up doing, and then thereafter went to the ER and found out that I had a level 1 fracture in the radial head of my arm. Thankfully for me, it was just a level 1, so I was out of the sling within 72 hours, which was quite amazing. So it's been quite an evolution because I went from running my first 10K to my first 50 mile in a year. So the progression is very quick. But so when I hear people say like they could never do a 50 mile, they could never do 100 miles, I'm like, you could. If I can do it, anybody can do it because it's really not that difficult. It's just putting one foot in front of the other. So yeah. Anyway, I think I'll just open it up to some questions. Anybody with questions?
What were some of the challenges you faced as you went from mountain bike to running your first mile and as you said 50 miles in 1 year? It can't just be that easy of a progression, right? What were some of the challenges and barriers you had to overcome?
Okay, so the questions were, what were some of the challenges that I faced from progressing from 1 mile to 5K, 10K, and all of that? You know, I think the biggest challenge was mentally. Running is such a mental sport, so it's just convincing yourself to go that further distance. And for me, I applied a lot of my weight loss goals to my running goals. So it was kind of a transition from the weight loss to, okay, I've lost the 120 pounds, now what? And then it was just finding out what my body can do, and I think that's what I keep trying to find. And there's challenges within each distance, whether it be finding out what nutrition works best for you, or in that extreme long distance, when to sleep is a really big one that I'm still trying to figure out. So there's lots of challenges that come along with ultra running, but it's kind of a trial and error thing. Any other questions?
What is it about running that does it for you? That God gave you the addiction?
Okay, so the question is, what is it about running that does it for me or gives me that addiction towards running? So for me, I always have kind of had an addictive personality. I've struggled with drug and alcohol abuse in the past. And so for me, I think I replaced that with my running addiction. And when you get into ultra running, I think every ultra runner that is right here can tell you it is a very addictive sport. You want to see what your body is capable of, and you want to see what next level you can get to. Other people are concerned about PRs and stuff like that. That's not what I'm in it for. I just want to know what's the best I can do and how can I get better at it.
What did your train up for 200 miles look like? I think about ultras I've ran, and like some of the, I guess it is it really that much longer that you train for? Like your longer runs, are they maybe 6 hours at a time, or is it, what does that look like?
Okay, so the question was, what does training for a 200-mile race look like? Honestly, there's not much difference between training for a 50K to a 50-mile to a 100-mile to a 200-mile. I work with a coach, and she kind of set out a plan for me. So I think my longest run going into this was a 50K. I don't think that anything beyond that is going to be one way or another detrimental. I know some people that I've talked to will train do a 50-mile race leading up to it, or even a 100-mile race a few weeks out. But for me, anything beyond 6 hours, I don't think is beneficial. My base has always been pretty solid. I typically run about a 50-mile week on an average week. At my high point of training, around 90 miles.
What would you say your favorite distance is in ultra?
The question was, what is my favorite distance in ultra running? I would say a 50-mile. I feel like I can still race a 50-mile quite competitively, and it's a long enough distance that you're going to have lots of highs and lows to navigate. I just think it's a good sweet spot between a marathon to the 100-mile distance. It's worked for me. I really enjoyed the 50-mile distance.
How do you kind of occupy your mind during the like?
So the question was, how do I occupy my mind during 150 miles? Well, with this particular race, we were able to have pacers jump in after the first loop. So I had pacers come on after my third loop when it was dark, because it was a 4 p.m. race start. So I had lots of conversation to occupy my time, and there were times where I didn't want to talk to anybody either. So, my mind kind of bounces around when I'm running anyway, varying from what's going on in my life to certain goals I want to achieve to visualizing that finish as well. So I think what helped in the 150-mile distance was that I had so many people kind of interchanging that it was just a constant conversation. And since a lot of them were strangers, just getting to know them and their stories too. So it made time fly. I didn't realize I was on the trail for, almost 56 hours. So
Between your 50-mile attempt in Missouri, is your first ultra, and 200 in Illinois, what drew you to those particular events? Why those versus others?
okay, so the question is, what drew me to the particular events that I've raced? Honestly, I look for something that's going to be close. I try and find stuff that is single track because I really enjoy single track races. But honestly, there's nothing in particular that really sticks out. It's just when that timing is going to work for me for recovery and stuff like that. Distances don't bother me like driving to them. My first 50K was in California. So I drove over 24 hours to get there. I don't think there's any deterrent because, I'd like to run an ultra in every state, honestly. So I'm just knocking them out.
What's a race you've heard of that you want to run that you haven't yet?
Oh, what's a race that I've heard of that I want to run and haven't? Gosh, the list is kind of endless there. Someday, like with any ultra runner, Western States would be really awesome to run. I was lucky enough to get into Leadville, so I'm already knocking off one of those bucket list races in August. So I'm really excited for that. Another race that I'd like to do is UTMB, which I've already got some points added up for that. So now I just need to get a passport and complete these 100-milers that I've got coming up, and I'll have enough points to do UTMB 100. Then here within the States, some other ones I'd like to do, Hard Rock, Ouray, a lot of Colorado races speak to me. I really want to challenge myself in those mountain races, and being from the flat side of South Dakota, you can't really train for that exactly, but I'd like to see what my body is capable of at altitude. Anything?
Uh, like, how do you determine like what you carry as far as water and fuel goes versus relying upon aid stations?
Okay, so the question is, what do I determine to carry versus relying upon aid stations? So I have like some staples that I always carry in an ultra, which are gummy bears, Cheez-Its, and peanut butter and jelly roll-ups in a tortilla. Those are some of my favorite things. And then my go-to fuel of choice is Tailwind, which goes directly into your water. Um, so what I do going into a race is look at how many miles between each aid station am I going to be going, and that determines whether or not I put water bottles in my vest as well, because I'm notorious for a handheld. I ran my 100 miler with a handheld. In my 150, I couldn't necessarily do that because I was using poles. But it's all just determining what the course is going to be like and how far you have to go between there. And then I like to look at the weather and stuff too, because obviously if it's hotter or more humid, you're going to be drinking a lot more water. So just preparing the best you can, and I typically over prepare. So, any other questions?
What do you do mentally and nutrition or fluid-wise when you are in these 100 milers or in this case 150 milers where you become sleep deprived and you're kind of almost to that point where you don't know, you're kind of going in and out? Do you use a mental mantra to try to get you out of that sleep deprivation? Do you use caffeine, sugar, or anything that you use specific?
Okay, so the question was, what do I use specifically when I'm kind of sleep deprived for fuel, nutrition, and stuff like that? I pretty much stick to the same thing. In my first 100 miler, sweet was not good for me. Anything like I had an unflavored Tailwind, but it still tasted sweet, and I just kept telling my crew, I was like, "This is sweet. Why is this sweet? I just want something plain." So I ended up switching from solids and Tailwind to just plain water, and broth was kind of what carried me through. As far as sleep deprivation goes, I think my mental acuity is pretty good in those longer distances. I noticed it more in the 200-mile attempt where I went 150 miles that I was feeling more sleep deprived. And at that point, I was just like, I'm going to take a nap. And it was the hottest point of the day. Because Friday we did have a little reprieve from the rain, and it got up to like 75-ish. And I just decided, hey, I'm 80 miles in, I'll take my nap. I got up from the nap and was like, woo, ready to go, let's do this. So I think I can handle being awake for long periods of time pretty well.
What's the one piece of advice you give somebody who's going to start doing ultra that you're like, I wish I had known this when I started?
What's the one piece of advice I would give for anybody wanting to start ultra? That I wish I knew beforehand. I think the biggest thing is learning how to fuel, and don't try anything new on race day. Like, don't wear a new vest that you've never ran in. Like, always train in what you're going to run in, because in my first 50K, I completely got rubbed raw here and here from a new vest that I had never worn before. And I mean, I was bleeding profusely from these. And then like one girl was like, "Oh, honey, you look rough, like 16 miles into this 50K." So that's my biggest piece of advice, is just train with what you know is going to work, and try out different things in your training, whether it be new fuel, solid foods, because in those longer distances, you're going to need solid food at some point. The question was, did I change shoes multiple times? Yes, I did. In the 151 miles that I did, I changed shoes almost every loop, because I was exposed to several creek crossings. My feet were constantly wet, so I was changing socks. reapplying lube, taping any blisters, and then changing out shoes. In some cases, I didn't have time because I realized the clock was against me, and so I was like, okay, I'm just going to keep going. But yeah, I think that was very beneficial to try and keep those feet as dry as possible.
In your training program, depending on what the race is like as far as the terrain goes, how do you balance between running on good earth versus like so is it pavement versus soft stuff? How do you kind of balance that depending on what your race is?
Okay, the question was, how do I balance running pavement versus trail when I'm training for a race? I typically do all my long runs on trail or try and simulate as close as I can to what I'm going to be running on. During the week, especially when it's a shorter distance, I'll just do pavement. I try not to do pavement as much as I can, but it doesn't always work that way between life and family and obligations. So, yeah, I think most of the time during the week I'll run in town, and then those long runs especially, I want to be on trail. The question was, did I try to get out to the hills to train? Yeah, I went out to the hills quite a bit. Even last year I went out to the hills quite a bit, but the year prior to that, when I was training for those 100 miles and 50-mile races, I went out and did as many different trails out there that I could, just because the trails out there are so much better anyway, and a lot of the races I've done are single track, more rocky and technical terrain that we just don't have here on this side of the state, unfortunately. So yeah, I went out to the hills quite a bit.
When you're doing these long races, your crew is really important. So can you talk a little bit about, you have your crew chief right here, Jess, to talk a little bit about what people in the crew for you do, what are some things you've learned as you guys have worked together?
Yeah. Okay, so the question was kind of basically what you look for in a crew member and how you learn to grow with each other. It's been very fortunate that Jess and I have done a lot of our new distances in kind of the same increment. So I think we've learned from each other, and we run with each other constantly. So I think it's very important to have crew and pacers that know you well. However, those strangers were a blessing in disguise at the 150 miler. The trail running community is just, I don't even have words for how amazing every individual that I've met has been. But I think the fact that Jess knows me so well is why I have her at every ultra, because she knows without words how I'm feeling. Or like even at this 150-mile race, like my crew would text her when I was about a mile away and say, hey, we're almost there. Like, she wants this to eat, so that she would have it ready for me. And there was one point that I said I wanted like a hamburger, and then Jess was like, oh, I was thinking a breakfast burrito. And I was like, you know what? That's it. Like, she just, when you spend 5 hours on a trail with somebody every weekend, they just know you, and you don't have to even use words to communicate. So that's what I'd recommend is, get people on board that you are with a lot, because they're going to know you the best, and they're going to know how to like handle you in your worst. And also, I've had a lot of grounded people, and I can be kind of a space case. Like, I really can be. I kind of, as you can tell in my speech, I just jumped around like from point to point to point. So having people that can kind of ground me and get me back to center has been very important for me.
Can you talk a little bit about having people you didn't know crew for you? You said they were a blessing in disguise, so what were some of the benefits of that?
Okay, so what were some of the benefits of having somebody that were strangers? Well, for one, conversation was endless. You have to ask questions. They were distracting my brain. So I wasn't thinking about those miles that I was putting in. Carolina, she was my overnight pacer, and this girl is tough as nails, I tell you what. And like she gave me the tough love that I needed to keep going. Like there were times where I just was like, I don't think I can do this anymore. And she was like, no, you're going to do this. We're going to get back there. You're going to eat. You're going to get back out there. Like she was just a kick in the butt that I really needed. Another one of the strangers, Doug, he had run this race prior and done the 150-mile and 100-mile distance. And he is so inspiring. Like he rode 500 miles on his bike to a race, ran 100 miles, and then rode back. So learning those stories about those people. And then when he found out I wasn't going to get a buckle for my 150 miles, he got my address from Jess. I might tear up talking about this. He got my address from Jess, and he sent me his own personal buckle from his collection, his 150-mile from Potawatomi that he earned. And I completely lost it when I got this in the mail because he like expedited shipped it and overnighted it to me, and it got there, and I was like, oh my gosh, I could not believe that. Another one of the strangers was Heather, and Heather, if anybody has met Heather, which Jess has, she is this little ball of fire that turned everything into karaoke. So like, you know, be like, we're sliding down this hill, and she was like singing at every turn. She was the one that skied down the hill. So, and her and I connected on a lot of different levels. And now we talk pretty regularly. And then there was Shelly, which was another stranger to me that I unfortunately didn't get to spend a lot of time with. But she was, you know, whenever I'd come in, she was just like, hey, you're doing awesome. She didn't pace at all, but she was very helpful as a crew member. And then there was Anna, which I had met at Berryman 50, but still didn't know very well. And so we knew a lot of common people that we had met at Berryman. So it was just having that conversation and that distraction and just kind of reminiscing about different times too. So, I mean, each one of those individuals contributed so much into just making it an adventure, really. And I think that helped me out so much, just not knowing them and getting to know them and them being so supportive and doing so many amazing things for me. And they didn't know me, and that's why I say, like, the trail runners are a completely different breed. We go above and beyond for people we don't even know. Any other questions?
What's the best food you ate during a race?
What's the best food I ate during my race? Oh, man. That's tough because they had ribs, they had pulled pork, but I swear I was probably happiest after that sausage breakfast pizza. Like, I was on cloud nine when I came into the aid station. I was like, I just had breakfast pizza from Casey's, guys. And it was amazing. So, yeah, that probably topped it. Or those awesome potatoes that you made me with broth in them. Huh. Could not top that. Anybody else?
What other races are you doing this year?
What other races am I doing this year? I've got Kettle Moraine here in about 2.5 weeks, which a couple people that are here will be there with me, so I'm pretty excited for that. So Jess and Jeremy, so they'll be with me. And Jess is with me at everything, so we'll just say that. Then I have Leadville 100 in August. Jess and Jeremy will be there too. And a couple others will be there too. Then I've got Cloud Splitter 100, and that one's in Virginia. That's probably a lesser known race for all of you. It goes through the Appalachian Mountains, through the highest point called High Knob. And I summit that 4 times in that race. It's kind of like a double out and back loop, out and back too. So yeah, and then I'll finish the year off with Hitchcock 50, and then I'll be back at Potawatomi next April. So, and I'm gonna finish that 200.
Then you'll be talking to us again about it.
Yeah, I'll be talking to you again about it, and I'll be like, hey, I did it this time, And it might have been awful, but, you know, there's so much you learn about yourself in those longer distances. Like, what can my body handle? What can I handle? The condition between the conditions and fatigue and pain, because there's all of that goes into those longer distances.
What drives you to keep going after you break your arm in the middle of a race?
What drove me to keep going after I broke my arm in the middle of a race? Honestly, there were so many different times that I thought about dropping in that race. Like, I was like, I'll just get to the next aid station and then I'll call it quits. And then I got there and everybody's looking at me. They're like, can we clean you up at all? And I'm like, no, I'm good. I'm good. I'm just going to go. And then you had people on the trail that would pass me and they're like, oh, you look kind of bad right now. Like, because, I mean, honestly, there was blood spewing down my hand. My elbow was all bloody. My knee was just profusely bleeding. So people were giving me Kleenexes, Band-Aids. Somebody gave me an aspirin. And they kept saying, we'll send somebody back for you. And I'm like, no, I want to finish this loop. Like, I think the thing behind it was like, I wanted to prove to myself that I could go through that pain and at least get a marathon finisher's medal. Whether or not it counted, they didn't even count it as a DNF, but they didn't list my name as an official finisher either. So it doesn't hurt me and it didn't help me, but it was more of like a personal achievement that, hey, I went through this and saw the protrusion in my arm and was like, no, I'm just going to keep going. I'll get back to my car and drive to the ER. It's fine. Anybody?
How much longer of a race are you going to do? You went from, 5K, you're up to 200 miles now. Do you have a distance in mind that that's going to be it? Or are you just going to keep going longer and longer and longer?
So the question is, how much longer of a race will I do? There's a couple different ones on my radar that are longer than 200, like Moab 240, Cocodona 250. Those are things I'd like to do. There's Vol State that I want to do as well. I don't remember the exact distance, but I want to say it's over 300. So I don't think there's any distance that I'll probably shy away from. I'm not as crazy as Ryan Wanlith. I'm not going to go up to Alaska and do 1,000 miles. But, if there's something warmer, then yeah, I would do that. I wouldn't say fair. I'm not a fair weather ultra runner. Don't twist my words like that. I would say my sweet spot is between like 40 at max 60, and then anything beyond that 60-degree mark, I start to suffer a little bit. Below 40 degrees, I only say the 40-degree mark because I can still wear a tank and shorts and be fine.
So how do you prep the night before? Is it consistent then? You finish 50 miles, 50 miles, you can prep the season the night before?
The question is, how do I prep the night before, depending on the distance? I think it all looks the same. There's usually going to involve some barbecue. That's been kind of my go-to staple. So lots of protein, a little bit of carbs. And then I like to have a beer the night before too. It's carbs. So it helps. And I think that's also just kind of a relaxation point too. I usually start prepping all of my stuff, like have it prepackaged and ready to go within a week to 2 weeks before. So the night before is just making sure everything's kind of ready to go. I get my vest all set, so that's ready to go. I kind of lay out my clothes so I know what I'm going to wear. That's usually how I prep those. So just making sure all those final details are there, and then loading up on food.
Ever track the calorie count?
Do it.
As you run, like in a mile, how many calories?
Oh, so the question was, do I ever track my calories in a race? No, nope, I don't. I'll do 2 scoops of Tailwind in my water bottle, so I know that's 200 calories. And so it's always making sure I refill at every aid station, because in most distances, it's been about 5 to 10 miles between each aid station. So I'll fill up my water bottle and have that 200 calories again, and then whatever looks good at the aid station and whatever I have in my vest that might sound good if I get hungry. I mean, at that point, you're burning so many calories, like it really doesn't matter.
Yeah, that's like, I was wondering, how many calories you burn.
Goodness. I would say in a 100-mile race, I probably burn around anywhere from 16,000 to 20,000 calories is what I want to guess. Because, in a marathon, you're burning about 4,000. So just multiplying that times, 4 or whatever. So. On my first day of running, did I envision where I'd be today? No. I would have never guessed this. Like my first time running, I was doing like 30-second intervals of running on the treadmill, and then I'd follow it by 2 minutes of walking. And then I just kind of increased the run to walk ratio up until it took me about 3 months to even run my first full mile. But like I said, I was 260 pounds at the start, so you can't just go from not running to running like that. So anybody starting that kind of journey, I've had a lot of people ask me, how do you start that? And I tell them the same thing. Intervals, switching it up between weightlifting, which was very important in that weight loss phase. And then I would do elliptical and biking. So it's just balancing out that cardio and not just solely running. So it blows my mind that I'm here right now and I've done this. Like I'm still like, was that real? I know at 90 miles in at my first 100, I started crying because I was like, a year and a half ago, I was 260 pounds and I'm about to finish 100 miles. And like the last 10 miles of that race, I was crying on and off for that and just thinking of all I went through. So no, I would have never guessed that. And I say that to anybody that says they can never do these distances. It's like, just wait. You can.
Adam wants to know, with all the success and failures you've experienced in running, is there things that still make you nervous or that you worry about?
So with all my success and failures in running, are there still things that make me nervous? Yes. Yes, there are a lot of things that make me nervous. Whether that be snakes on the trail, which happens. I'm deathly afraid. Altitude still freaks me out a little bit because I haven't had a ton of experience. So knowing that I'm going into a mountain race, a very prominent mountain race, that is still very intimidating. And, whether or not you've been doing the distances or not, I mean, there's no guarantees. So going into anything, I'm still nervous because you don't know how your body is going to respond. Anybody else? I know, I got a warm beer over there. Anybody else got questions? No? All right.
Thank you.
Well, thank you guys. Appreciate it.